Hello and welcome to another Döhle Yacht Coffee Break. Today I'm joined by Jonathan, the MD of Maritime Aviation. Thank you very much for coming along, Jonathan.
Thanks for inviting me.
Today we just want to kind of talk about clarification of terminology. You know, there's an awful lot of commercial codes out there now, and there's an awful lot of wording within that I think if you could just explain some of it, give us a bit of clarification, would be fantastic for us and our listeners.
Sure.
So I suppose the first one is AIB. Can you explain kind of what they are and how they work?
Okay, so aviation inspection bodies are what AIB stands for, and effectively they work on behalf of the flag to make sure that a shipboard heliport meets the standards that it's required to meet. So they are authorised by the flag to audit and certify against whichever standard is being used for that vessel.
Okay, fantastic. My next one is a common that we see and it's sort of talked about an awful lot, especially at the design stage, is the D value and the T value. Can you just explain a bit more about those two?
Sure. So if you're going to be operating a helicopter on a ship, on a shipboard heliport, certainly for commercial operations, you need to make sure that the facility is suitable for that helicopter. So when you're looking at designing a heliport, if you've got a particular helicopter in mind, so let's say a yacht owner wants to operate an Airbus H145, you can use that as the design helicopter to make sure that the heliport meets the requirements to support it. So the D value and the T value are two of the key areas that we look at against the design helicopter. The D value is effectively how big the helicopter is. Yeah. D for dimension. So as you'd expect, that covers how large it is, which the definition is when the rotors are turning, all the rotors are turning, it's the maximum length or width, but normally length with helicopters, of that aircraft. Okay. So typical values are between sort of 12 and 15 metres for the smaller end, and then for some of the very larger helicopters, you're talking about above 15 metres for the D value.
And how about T values?
So the T value, as opposed to the physical dimensions, it's all about the weight of the aircraft. And for that, we look at the maximum takeoff weight. So an aircraft, when it's certified, will have a maximum weight that it's allowed to take off. And that will include the airframe, the passengers, the fuel, the cargo, however it's formed. There'll be a maximum value, and that's a fixed value. So typically we're looking at between 3 and 5 tons. And the deck needs to be built to a technical standard to be able to support that operating aircraft. So again, if we look at the design helicopter, if we know which aircraft it is, then great. We can look at the D value of the aircraft and the T value and make sure that the deck is suitable for those. If you don't know and you're just building a commercial deck, then you'll pick a design helicopter and make sure that those standards are met for dimensions and weight.
Okay, fantastic. And you mentioned it earlier, the wording heliport, and if you look in the Red Ensign Code, we kind of talk about heli deck, and it does reference the heliport. Can you kind of just clarify that situation? You know, what is a heliport and how is it related to the heli deck?
Okay, so the nomenclature that we use, it has changed over time, but what we look for the master reference is the ICAO documents. And ICAO is like the IMO for aircraft, International Civil Aviation Organization, and there are two main references for heliports that they have. One is Annex 14 Volume 2, and the other one, an offset for that, is ICAO document 9261, which is a heliports manual.
Okay.
And in there, the definitions are for shipboard heliports and helideck. The difference being helideck only refers to heliports in support of offshore oil and gas, so on oil rigs and FPSOs, etc. If it's not on an oil and gas rig, it's not a helideck, according to the ICAO definition. And I do believe that future definitions in the likes of CAP 437, that is the UK standard, which is an international standard as well, for offshore oil and gas, they will also soon refer to them as shipboard or heliports rather than helidecks.
So we should start to see heliports become much more of a common terminology within the marine and especially the yachting world.
Yes.
Okay.
And I guess that, like an airport, each heliport is actually providing a full service. It isn't just a deck for somebody to land on. There is a full support service of fire and rescue, of trained people, of safety management. So I think in terms of going forward, it does give a more complete feeling of, when you go and land on that vessel, that all the support structures are in place for you to conduct safe helicopter operations. Okay,
and that brings me nicely on to my next one. In the Red Ensign Code, we have two common phrases, which is the HLAC and the HLATC, the two certifications. Can you kind of expand a bit on both of those, please?
Sure. So if you want to certify a heliport to a certain standard, we'll take the Red Ensign Code. There are two documents that you need to have that the AIB will hopefully provide. They stand for Helicopter Landing Area Technical Certificate, which is the TC, and the other one is just certificate. And the difference being that the technical certificate is effectively completed on behalf of the Classification Society to make sure it meets the technical standards. So like we talked about the T value, make sure the deck strength is satisfactory, that kind of thing. The other certificate, the HLAC as it's called, is basically to make sure that all of the operational requirements are in place, and that includes sufficient personnel trained to the right standard, make sure there's a shipboard heliport operations manual in place and that it's suitable for the task it's required to do, and to make sure all of the other ancillary equipment is available and serviceable on board. So things like the fire systems and the portable fire systems, the radios, the helideck monitoring system or heliport monitoring system on the bridge. Make sure all of those are operational and meet the requirement. Once that's been completed, if there are no questions against any of that, then you should get a full certificate valid for 12 months.
Okay, fantastic. And my last one, which is a classic, I mean, you and I worked on a lot of the working groups to help develop some of these codes. And the yacht world, rightly or wrongly, has inherited a term that's kind of come through as the industry has grown up with helicopters, which is the classic touch and go. And can you just explain to probably our listeners why that's the wrong wording, technically, that should be used, especially in the yacht industry?
Sure. Well, I think if you just imagine the word touch and go, it just conjures up a taxi pulling up on the curb, picking up passengers and disappearing. And whilst, that does describe it, the critical stages of flight for an aircraft are when all the maximum pressure is on all the different systems, engines, gearbox, are takeoff and landing. So in many ways, those are the most critical times that we've got to cover off. So just saying that we're just going to land on and take off, actually that's some of the potentially the most dangerous or risky times, and when you're nearest to other hazards and obstacles on the vessel, on the deck itself. So in terms of using that phrase, we strongly discourage not the case. Where it came from, for fixed wing training, so aeroplanes, training coming in, if you do circuits when you're training, you take off, you do a circuit, you land, and then you take off again. The term touch and go implies that the aircraft's just going to come in, touch its wheels on the tarmac, and then power on, take off again, so it doesn't come to a full stop. So it's been taken out of context. It is a fixed wing primarily training term that's been brought into the industry, and we strongly discourage its use. In fact, it shouldn't be used.
All right, Jonathan, fantastic. Thank you very much for your time today. Guys, I hope you found today useful. Again, as always, if you've got any questions or concerns, our details are at the end of this coffee break. And thank you very much for listening.